your host, Diane Bogino. Recently, I had the privilege of interviewing multiple Emmy Award winner Bill Stainton. Bill had so much great information to share with our viewers that we put the interview in two parts. But first, let me tell you about this highly accomplished individual. Not only is Bill a multiple Emmy Award-winning TV producer, he's also a writer and performer, a highly sought-after keynote speaker, and an internationally recognized Beatles expert. Not bad for a kid who grew up behind a dairy farm in the Amish countryside of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Today, Bill blends the business smarts he learned from 20 years in corporate management with the showbiz sparks he gleaned from working with people like Jerry Seinfeld, Ellen DeGeneres, and Jay Leno to create riveting presentations enjoyed by audiences around the world. Focusing primarily on the areas of leadership, teamwork, and innovation, Bill calls upon his background as a comedy writer to customize each keynote for every client. And unlike some leadership speakers, Bill has actually led a successful team. Let's watch as Bill delivers his exciting message.
Thanks for having me here.
So one of your speeches is the 5 best decisions the Beatles ever made and why you should make them too.
That's correct.
Now, the Beatles broke up more than 40 years ago,
They did.
I think. So why should business owners be interested in what they thought?
You know, I get that question a lot, and the reason is, maybe you like their music and don't. I mean, there are actually people out there who don't really care for the Beatles' music. There aren't many, and they're wrong, but they're out there. But it's a fair argument. You can argue about their music, you can argue about their hair, you can argue about their politics, but you can't argue about their success, can you? I mean, whether you like them or not, when it comes to success, the Beatles are still the gold standard in their industry. I challenge you to find any industry, organization, business that's not interested in that kind of success. I mean, really, wouldn't you like to be known as the Beatles of your industry?
Oh, sure.
And there are things that they did that everybody can learn from. And so that's what I do. I help businesses and organizations and associations realize what those things are, what those secrets to success are that the Beatles did that will apply to everybody.
And so what were those 5 decisions that they made?
I'll give you the nutshell version. Let's see how quick I can make this. The first one I call spreading the spotlight. I talk about the day that John Lennon first met Paul McCartney. John Lennon was 16 years old. He was the leader of his own rock and roll band. And that's a pretty powerful position for a 16-year-old boy. And all of a sudden he's introduced to this McCartney fella. And he quickly finds out that Paul McCartney is a better guitar player, a better singer, and Paul McCartney, the cute one, he's better looking too. So now John Lennon's got to make this decision. Do I keep the spotlight just on me as the leader of my own rock and roll band? Or do I spread the spotlight, invite this McCartney triple threat in, and make the team better? Now, that's a 16-year-old kid having to make that decision. I know a lot of 40, 50, and 60-year-olds who don't have the confidence to make that decision, to bring in somebody who might be a threat to their authority, who might have a little stronger skill set than them. But that's what that's all about. So that first one is being willing to bring in a great team, have the confidence to do that, put your ego in check for a little bit, and then share the credit, which Paul and John certainly did. The second decision is the decision to have a single shared vision. All 4 Beatles had a single shared vision, and their vision was that they were going to be bigger than Elvis. Now, I know there's a lot of Elvis fans listening to this, and I'm not trying to say that whether or not they achieved that. I'm just saying they aimed high. And this is back when they were one of the worst bands in Liverpool. But it was 4 people all pointing in the same direction. And when you get all your team pointing in the same direction under a unified single shared vision that's exciting, that's powerful, that's short, as I say, if it doesn't fit on a bumper sticker, it's probably too long, it's almost unstoppable. Third decision is the decision to play to their strengths. Now, the Beatles had a lot of strengths, but where they put most of their energy was in songwriting. See, what they did was they asked the question that most of us don't ask, and that is, what is it that we can do better than anyone else? And there's always something, but most of us go through our whole lives without ever asking that question or answering it. For the Beatles, it was songwriting. Yes, we're good singers. Actually, they were among the best singers in rock and roll history. Yes, we're decent instrumentalists. We can play our instruments, but others can do that better. Nobody can touch us when it comes to songwriting, and that's why we're still talking about the Beatles more than 40 years after they broke up, because the songs just hold up. The fourth decision is the decision to shake it up. The Beatles went through a lot of stages. I mean, they were the mop top singing "She Loves You, Yeah, Yeah, Yeah." Now, they could have kept doing that. Their fans wanted them to keep doing that. Their fans wanted them to keep touring. But at the peak of their fame in 1966, the Beatles decided to stop touring. And the rules said you couldn't do that. I mean, the rules of rock and roll said even now, you have to tour if you want to make it as a rock and roll band. And the Beatles decided to challenge the rules and shake it up, and they did no more touring, and they disappeared for 9 months. And when they came back, most people hardly even recognized them. They'd grown mustaches, their hair was different, John Lennon was wearing his glasses, and they had a little album called Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, which changed everything. That's the album that turned rock and roll into an... And the rest of the business is still trying to catch up. I mean, it's amazing. Any new band of any promise that comes out today, they invariably get compared to the Beatles, and invariably the Beatles come out ahead. Now, if the Beatles had stayed doing what they were doing, if they just continued being the mop top, singing their little mop top songs, they would have been a good little 60s band. But we wouldn't be talking about them now. And the fifth decision was what I call the decision to carry that weight, because that's a Beatles song, Carry That Weight. But it's the decision to do the work. Paul McCartney said the reason we were twice as good as anyone else is because we worked twice as hard as anyone else. Even with all the talent they had, even with all the infrastructure they had, even with all the momentum they had, they still had to work twice as hard as anyone else. And they did, if you look at their schedule. They worked twice as hard as anyone else did. So if the Beatles had to work twice as hard, what's stopping the rest of us? Hello, I mean, come on. So those, in a nutshell, those are the 5 key decisions that I think any business can incorporate to increase their bottom line and increase their success.
I want to know why you think the Beatles broke up.
Oh, that's a big question. Because there's all these theories, Yoko broke them up, or money broke them up, or whatever. Virtually all of that was symptomatic. I mean, there were business things that were a problem. I'll tell you what really broke them up. One of the decisions that I talk about was the decision to have a single shared vision. I talked about all 4 of the Beatles pointing in the same direction. That's what kept them together and took them to the top of the charts. What ultimately broke them up was that they were no longer 4 people pointing in the same direction. There were 4 people pointing in 4 different directions. By this time they had families, some of them had children, they had different musical interests. George was getting into Eastern music, John wanted to do certain things, and they just weren't cohesive anymore. And so everything else on top of that, the money squabbles, the influence of Yoko Ono, things like that, those were all symptoms. The Beatles broke up, for all intents and purposes, the Beatles broke up in 1968. Now they still made albums, but they just weren't really a cohesive band. The writing was on the wall. So I think that's what did it. They lost that single shared vision. The lesson for businesses is keep your eye, if you're a leader, keep your eye on that vision. Make sure your people are still buying into the vision you have. Find ways to keep invigorating them. Keep making that vision real and palpable and exciting. Because once it starts to dissipate, then you're going to start losing some control and your success is going to go down.